So what do we mean by generative AI? Well, I think many of you are familiar with the idea of artificial intelligence. That's machines that can do things, cognitive things normally done by a human. And generative AI really came onto the scene, especially in November 2022, when ChatGPT came into the world. This was a system that was pretty good at producing human-like text, and it's been followed by generative AI that can create images just weeks ago. You probably understand enough about the systems, but Sam Altman, the head of OpenAI, actually himself said that he does not know how the ChatGPT or GPT-4 does some of the things that it does. Just recently, we had the example of Gemini, Google's generative AI, which was producing unusual results. No one could really explain why. They've had to stop it generating images of people. And that's indeed one of the challenges here, that we've got huge opportunity, hugely interesting activity, but we don't always understand how it's doing what it's doing, and we don't necessarily understand the long-term consequences. So that's really what we'll be talking about today. Luckily, all I've got to do today is ask the questions. I don't have to answer anything. It's great. I've got these guys who are going to help us answer, and we have a wonderful lineup. We have a lawyer, a poet, a professor, a technologist, who are going to help you think about these questions.
As early as 2017, Facebook's, as they were then known, Artificial Intelligence Lab, had an experiment of trying to set up a model using LLM, large language models, and got two computers to start talking to each other in English. Within a few months, nobody could understand what the two machines were talking about because they invented their own language. And they started talking among themselves, and apparently that language is much more efficient than the English language. Only the machines understood their language. What did Facebook do? They shut the system down. They retrained the engine and forced it to use English. That's an example of the spurious and odd way in which generative AI can work, to such an extent that people lose control over the systems. And they're not alone. Google was also in the same space in 2020. When one of their top scientists resigned. Why did she resign? She resigned on principle because for the same very reason that happened in 2017, the inability to control generative AI engines. This is a real risk. It's a real threat. Now, so then you might say, well, Rajesh, you're a lawyer. Why can't we just pass a law and fix the problem? I've been in technology law all my life, professional life, and it has never worked fully. Right. But it is not the technology itself that should be attacked. It is the way in which the technology has been developed and brought into the world that we need to question critically. There is a significant amount of disinformation and misinformation that generative AI tools are creating today. The ability for us to be able to trust what we see online is now being questioned severely, and there are no solutions to this. There's intellectual property law issues, there are ethics concerns as well, there's lack of clarity as to who owns the content that's created by generative AI tools. These are all practical problems that while lawyers and regulators try to create laws and regulations, we will never be able to keep up with this technology.
It really helps to enhance your intelligence when used in the right way. So you have automated content creation tasks, you have acceleration of the creation process. This really helps us create new prototypes very easily, experiment. I can tell the students, go ahead, use it, and then tell me what you get. It actually encourages the students' critical thinking. In my mobile programming class, you can actually get to a higher baseline. You generate some code, it comes out, and then you actually have a mobile application working at that point in time. So instead of trying to solve some technical issues, I actually get to focus on the problem. It really helps education a lot. It augments the tutor. So if someone doesn't understand something, they can key it in, they can ask. What I work as is the facilitator. So it now shifts, and it democratizes what the student can do and what the student can learn.
Google's Bard, now Gemini, sells us Gen AI as a method to collaborate, brainstorm ideas, spark creativity, accelerate productivity. ChatGPT is sold as a tool. Use it for engaging conversations, gain insights, and automate tasks. So let's think about these two ideas, to collaborate and to be a tool. A tool is a device or implement used to carry out a particular function. There are numerous issues involved with generative AI, but I will talk about what I see as the three biggest problems. Number one, consent. This is a human problem because humans are allowing Gen AI access to other people's artwork, images, voice, text, and data. Number two, energy. Gen AI is incredibly energy intensive, surprisingly labor intensive, and requires constant input or annotation from human workers to keep it functional. If we use ChatGPT for a simple Q&A session, it consumes an absurd amount of water just Doing 20 questions with a generator is akin to pouring a 500 milliliter bottle of clean fresh water down the drain. And Stable Diffusion's open source XL, which was released in July, used as much power per image as that required to charge a smartphone. Recent estimations suggest AI servers on a global scale use the equivalent of what an entire country like Argentina uses in a year. In Google's 2023 environmental report, the company used 5.6 billion gallons of water, a 20% increase over its 2021 usage. Third problem, livelihood. There was no problem with generating art in the first place. Artists were doing perfectly fine. And now we have one. Gen AI threatens the livelihood of artists, pitting labor against the cheap slop produced by dead machines. The technology only benefits those who wish to produce content as quickly and cheaply as possible by removing artists from the creative process. It has no perspective to speak from, no odd fixations, perversions, or eccentricities that a person injects into their art. It's just a bland amalgamation of what has come before. It could perhaps write you a forgettable, formulaic superhero movie, but it wouldn't surprise you with a fresh spin on a familiar genre. It can only reconstruct art from tattered pieces it has already eaten.
On the creativity, though, I can't resist sort of needling you, and maybe I'll come back to this, that occasionally these discussions, people say, yes, well, generative AI will never produce a Jane Austen or a Michelangelo, but neither will most of us.
In the words of like Rajesh, we have laws that are always playing catch up. But the fact that these technologies are accessible to a broad range of the population means that the understanding and the impetus to build these institutions have gone up. Tracking the OECD governance frameworks, there are now 1,600 of them in just the past 18 months looking at artificial intelligence, where before that there was almost zero. If Gen AI was unleashed in a very different way, with only a small portion of the population, that would not exist. And I believe that building muscles, building institutional muscles, building our own understanding of the technology is key. And the way that Gen AI was deployed to all of us to use is the way that we build these muscles. Number two, these same groups, these international groups, and I'm sure one of them, the Global Partnership of Artificial Intelligence, we acknowledge all these problems that were shared by the proposition. I think we look forward to a day where, like creators, we'll be able to get the 3 Cs. And there is I'm not a lawyer, but there's lots of complexity in the IP space. I think a decent first point was to have, number one, consent. Please let me give you my consent before you train on my creations. Number two, credit. Please mention who you are taking it from. And number 3, compensation. If you are using Stable Diffusion, there exists the means to track programmatically, and we're able to track all these things. And so the third C is compensation. There are groups actively working towards a better future for both creators as well as technologies alike. Finally, we have lots of problems with this concept of hallucinations, which is misinformation, errors, offensive remarks, and misaligned output. I want to just put this question to the audience. Can you think of another species that sometimes commits errors, that sometimes is misaligned with their manager, that sometimes gives offense? I would say that it is actually ourselves, human beings. Running an AI governance team, we find that many people find it very intuitive to actually manage these AI systems because it's very much similar to managing an enthusiastic but often mistaken intern. So, I would say that hallucinations is a problem, but it's not like the world has no experience in dealing with mistakes. And I think that, these are all surmountable barriers that we can push through to get the benefits of generative AI.
I agree. It wasn't a bad thing as long as it was in the labs, but not the moment it was unleashed to the world. Like Mark said, yes, certainly artists will be affected, but it's not just artists alone. Many others are also going to be affected in terms of their ability to do work the way they have been doing it now. And I'm not just talking about productivity gains. I'm talking about people who are honest workers who are doing good work. I think there was mention about Taylor Swift as well, the victim of deepfakes. So when I attend a concert, I'll be wondering whether or not I'm seeing the real Taylor Swift or some virtual AI version. Again, that is an example of generative AI being used for bad, not for good. And that's why we stand with the House that this technology is not a bad technology. The House says this technology should not have been unleashed onto society at this point in time. We needed the time, we needed good people working hard on it, we needed rules, laws, regulations, so that all of us will be ready and be able to make full use of the technology.
During the Industrial Revolution in the 1930s, the tractors, they took away the jobs of the farmers, they automated everything, and people started to lose their jobs. In the Great Depression, unemployment was about 20%. And then one of the prominent British economists, John Keynes, said that we had a new disease. We had technological unemployment. But look where we are today. So technology has advanced. So what happens is that technology creates many new industries and has expanded the market for many new and different items. So we might not have a farming job anymore, but I'm very sure that now with the Industrial Revolution, we have machine maintenance technician, computer network engineer, computer solutions technologist, and YouTuber, social media influencer. These are new jobs, right? So therefore, it wouldn't be taking jobs away, but rather the creation of new jobs.
I think frameworks are important, and this is what we don't have for Gen AI. So you need a framework to mitigate the impacts of job displacement. So to have retraining programs, to have a just transition for affected workers, about automation of content creation tasks. I have a couple of examples where this has gone really badly wrong. So for example, tenants across America have seen rents skyrocket thanks to an app called RailPage. And they did it's a landlord price fixing algorithm, and their defense was that it's not a crime if we commit it with an app. Nearly 1,000 British postmasters were wrongly convicted of fraud by Horizon, which was a faulty AI fraud hunting system that Fujitsu provided to Royal Mail. Their lives were ruined. Some went to prison. 4 of the AI's victims killed themselves. So there's real consequences. Teachers are already facilitators even before the advent of AI because of the exponential explosion of information. And now with Gen AI, you grapple with potential misinformation and bias on top of all of that. So that's also a problem.
I want to talk about this idea of a bias and scaling models that are where we are not ready for it. I think that the tension of any technology is that all technology wants to scale, but every culture, every concept of ethics, every concept of what is right, what is acceptable is fiercely local. What we need is not just like one model, but what we need is many local models that's tuned to our local sensitivities and perceptions and so on. And I'll argue that that actually creates more work and not less work. Finally, I just want to mention the idea of frameworks. So in Singapore, we do have actually fairly mature frameworks as far as not just the Asia-Pacific region, but actually the world is concerned. So I also see the AI model governance frameworks quoted often in the world conversations. And as part of that framework, we actually have what I feel is very progressive, which is the idea of job redesign in the age of AI.
Local versions of large language models. And I think many of you are familiar with the idea of guardrails. We want to get these language models to behave. And one interesting thing we discovered is that sometimes in Singlish, it's a bit harder to get the model to behave. And one working theory is that although there is some literature in Singlish, most of Singlish tends to be used on forums like Hardware Zone, where people are not necessarily complying with the highest ethical standards. There's also this question about why the decision to unleash generative AI on the world was reached. And that's actually one of the big challenges coming from a university perspective, that in many ways one of the biggest shifts in AI research is the move from universities to companies. That back in the 2000s into around 2010, 2012, when what became large language models were being developed, machine learning, a lot of that research happened at universities. Today, almost all of it happens in private corporations. And the reason is data, compute, talent, all of that has gravitated towards these companies. It is so expensive and so energy consuming, only the biggest companies can invest. It's not a matter of doing things that we could not do ourselves, like generative AI has tremendous opportunities in drug discovery, protein folding, all these things that would take billions of years for humans to do. But a lot of generative AI is being used to try and do things that humans do, but more cheaply and easily. And maybe that's something we want to be concerned about. A more general phenomenon, I'm not sure if many of you have heard of this, there's this idea of the Flynn effect and the reverse Flynn effect. So the Flynn effect, so IQ is a measure of intelligence. There are all sorts of reasons to be wary about IQ as a measure. But through the 20th century, this guy Flynn discovered IQ was going up. We were getting smarter, it seemed. And what was interesting is we're still not entirely sure what that means or why, but it peaked around 1995 and now seems to be in decline. So we're all getting dumber. So what happened around the mid-1990s? Well, that was the spread of the personal computer. And with the emergence of the personal phone, the mobile phone, I think all of us are aware, we remember fewer telephone numbers, we're less likely to do mental arithmetic, so we're stretching our minds a little bit less. That might lead you on the proposition side to say, see, the machines are making us dumber. And yet, together with our machines, brains, we've got much greater memory. We've got much more information than in our pockets than we would ever have inside our heads.
If you look at what happened in Napster, it was a technology that was, in a sense, misused, but there was nothing wrong with the technology. And this concept of peer-to-peer networking is what drives cloud computing today. So the technology matured in a controlled manner. And I believe that what happened in Napster, if you all remember, was that Napster went down. And respectable music labels started switching over to the digital realm. Now, the question that could be asked is, if not for Napster, would they have made the switch? My answer is yes, they would. They knew that they had to because the technology that was being used to consume the content switched to digital. But what Napster enabled basically was pirated content. And that inherently was bad for recording artists, and it forced the recording label to act the way that it did. The same concern I have now with generative AI as well. This is not the way to go. There are many alternatives like what we have shared with you in terms of approaches.
How many Gen AI models do you think there are in the world? So the answer is actually over 300,000. I'm quite involved with open source myself and a supporter of free access to technology. And there are actually over 300,000 generative AI models, of which 50,000 plus are large language models. So I think while there is a narrative as we consume media, we hear the same names over and over again: Google, Gemini, OpenAI, Microsoft, and so on. But actually, the landscape of large language models and Gen AI is remarkably diverse. We actually need to become more diverse because OpenAI's GPT-4 may be great at maybe reading the Financial Times, but it's not so good at reading the hardware zone. So we do need our local models, and that's why we believe that what we are looking for is broad access and accessible technology.
So we talk about art, for example. Yes, there's a role for AI with art, with artists, right? We talk about AI in terms of trying to get new jobs. Yes, there's an opportunity for us to do that if we engage with every sector and talk about this technology and then release it in a controlled manner. So I think what we're trying to say here is, at the end of the day, unleash means let it free. Give it space to grow and to air. This is a type of technology that by its very nature needs to be controlled. And by letting it free, what we're doing is the worst possible thing to a fantastic technology. If we choose to control and bring it out into the world, we will have so many benefits for.
There's no possible way you're going to be stuffing it back, but we can actually still carefully consider all of these risks. Brings me back to one of the examples that when the car was first created, and then the first regulation also was, someone has to stand at the front with a red flag and someone has to stand at the back with another flag and we have to wave it. Yes, there might be some of these kinds of bumps in the road, but then we kind of got over it. So it is definitely important to promote transparency, accountability, and certain ethical guidelines in the development of AI. And it will actually augment human intelligence and allow you to actually discover new ways of doing things. Because remember that AI is actually a backward-looking model because it's trained on the past, right? But you are the guys that actually look into the future.
We think about the future of creativity. I think the essence of generative AI is it unbundles tasks. So often we think of a task like writing, but writing is actually a lot more different parts than just like writing. You have writing planning, writing conceptualization, then writing execution, and the mechanical part of it. Generative AI has not automated writing. Generative AI has automated writing execution. But what has happened is that we've unbundled this task of creation, this task of writing, and Gen AI has taken over not writing per se, but the mechanical part of writing. There is a space in the future for humans to unbundle and shift left, to focus and major on planning the strategy, the imagination part of it. Secondly, I think this concept of all these benefits and all these different risks. And if you want to imagine what a model of balance might look like, I would propose thinking of it like medicine. Over in medical, in the pharmaceutical industry, we have organizations like the EMA, like the FDA, and what they do is they look at a new medicine that comes out and they look at how much benefit you'll bring the world, but also how much side effects that you'll inflict on the world. Hallucinations, bias, all these are a bundle of side effects. We do need global institutions similar to the FDA, but for AI, to play that equivalent role, so that something that has a large footprint on the world would have the requisite checks and balances before it's released. I think that is something that we can all sign up for.
So here's the prompt for Gemini. Write a poem about cracking macadamia nuts. The title is Cracking Macadamias. Write the poem in free verse. Avoid cliches. Emerald armor, smooth and proud, guards a treasure hidden deep. No gentle coaxing, no soft shroud, only force can make it weep. Hammer poised, a primal dance, stone against unyielding sphere. Anticipation fills the trance. Will victory be near? I'll stop here. The poem carries on in this vein for another 16 lines. What's wrong with it? Well, I asked you to write in free verse, but it bizarrely keeps an ABAB rhyme scheme. I'll just read you my own poem about it. Surrounded by salt, they don't slip away. Ants bereaved in honey at the point of pleasure. A pose on the yoga mat until bodies fuse, trembling. The moment where toes splay sand before tides leap forward to strike a hammer blow on the nut's stubborn helm. A tangible ode to battlefield tanks marked by trench-staled hours. War is the wearing of spirit. Some nuts crack easily, prisoners under duress, yelling after a single jolt of electricity. Others resist for a while. The split, when it comes, leaves a hairline fracture. The lair of the nut glimpsed palely in buttery beginnings, the not quite rounded shape of itself, memory of something worth prying open. You see, a poem never exists solely for itself. It slips and slides between sutures of intent, teasing larger possibilities of the unseen. So can generative AI understand this twining of subject matter with wider tropes of human experience, of our frailty, our fallibility? Right now, I don't think so. So the production of culture in the next 5 to 10 years will really change, and that is, I think, undeniable. Generative AI is a production revolution, and it does lower barriers to creation. However, the question remains, and I don't think the opposition has fully answered this: at what cost?